And I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar titled Cloudy with a Chance of Disruption, a look into the state of the modern cloud. I'm going to pass things over to our featured presenter today. He is Chief Technology Evangelist for CompTIA, Mr. James Stanger. James, you now have the floor.
Hey, thank you so much, Kelly. Pleased to be here, folks. Yeah, today's presentation is about the modern state of the cloud, and I'm calling it Cloudy with a Chance of Disruption. I suppose I should have called it Cloudy with a Certainty of Disruption. I guess I was thinking of a movie my kids used to watch called Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. In a sense, there's a lot of meatball type of things going on because there are unusual things happening in the cloud. But that's good. That means there's lots of creativity. Take a look, folks, at this little graphic here that I have here. It's of these people kind of working on or actually destroying machinery, and then I superimposed very crudely some cloud over that. That's simply that's an old, very old daguerreotype, I think. Not daguerreotype, it's an old image created of workers that are basically Luddites, and they're trying to break machinery. Now, we're not trying to break anything today here at CompTIA or New Horizons or in this webinar, but what we are interested in doing is taking a look at the disruption that goes on. So hi, everybody. I'm James. I'm the Chief Technology Evangelist at CompTIA. I have a lot of CompTIA certifications. I have Microsoft certs, LPI certs, etc. But I do a lot of work with helping CompTIA create its certification and learning offerings. I've done work in pen testing, risk assessment, in virtualization, web technologies over the last 20, 25 years. Take a look at these little graphics that I have, not the one of my the little face there, but the one, these are pictures of a place in Scotland, in Scotland on the Isle of Skye. It's an island just off Scotland, and that is a cleared village. Back in the 19th century, the landowners decided that it was they'd make more money by having sheep on that land rather than people. And you're looking at the foundations of homes that were destroyed forcibly, and people were forcibly removed from their land. We don't want that to happen in a modern sense. We want people to embrace emerging technology and to adopt and to engage in you could call it digital transformation or what have you, but modern technology so that people are constantly upskilling. So let's talk about the cloud and what's been going on lately. Some of the folks that we've talked to at CompTIA are listed here on this very busy eye chart of a slide. I put it together because it shows actually the people I've been talking to over the last year. SoftBank in Japan, one of the largest internet service providers in the world. They own Sprint here in the United States, and they own tons of business in Japan, for example. Symantec, Oracle, Xerox, all these companies asking them about how they use the cloud. And it's not just companies either. It's also government entities like the United States Department of Defense or the Washington State Patrol, in the UK, the Office for Nuclear Regulation. And we basically discuss concepts about the cloud and about digital transformation, or as cool people call it, DX. What is it anyway? Well, really, digital transformation is not just where you modernize your platforms, or it's not even where you take paper-based trails and paper-based communications and turn them into electronic communication. That's digitization. Digital transformation is where you really reevaluate your business processes, and to be honest, it's where you evaluate your business altogether. It's not just changing your business applications or putting a bunch of cloud in place. It's actually where you're really taking a look at how you can best serve your market. Many companies that are engaged in what they think are digital transformation are just modernizing things. Digital transformation is where the company could actually ask itself, well, what do we think we're in the business of? So before I get too far ahead of myself, there are implications for IT professionals about digital transformation. And I use that term a little bit in quotes because I think a lot of people use that term and they don't have the slightest meaning, understanding of what it means. You could argue it means creative disruption, but it really means an organization is radically rethinking what it does for a living. As an IT professional, you need to have to support the initiatives that happen in regards to digital transformation, or in regards to a company changing and pivoting how it goes about doing its business. And so that means that you're going to have to really have a strong understanding of networking, of cloud, and also tech support. Digital transformation, believe it or not, radically alters how the help desk works and how various technical support individuals work. So again, digital transformation is not digitization. Digitization is where you make something electronic that wasn't before. You're reevaluating what business you're in. It reminds me of, some of you may have seen a movie called The Founder, basically where one of the persons in McDonald's realizes that he's really not in the hamburger business, he's more in the property business. That's kind of what a digital transformation kind of is, and it can apply to all entities. Take a look at the little graphic here. You have Netflix that has no actual cinemas, right? And back in the day, they didn't even own any content. They own a bit more content now. Uber doesn't own any taxis. Alibaba is a store, doesn't have any inventory. Airbnb, Facebook, you get the idea that they are in these businesses, but they actually don't own the things that they're in business for. There are companies that are in need of some form of transformation. AMC theaters, or any theater you can think of, Cinemark or whatever, or Yellow Cab, or Walmart, their brick and mortar. What are they in the business of in the future? You need to ask themselves what they're doing. In what way can they transform themselves? Well, there's a lot of innovation and adoption going on, folks, in regards to the cloud. And I think it's important to understand that we're very interested at CompTIA of understanding both innovation and adoption. But there's a difference. Innovation means something that has been created new and it's cutting edge. Adoption means it's actually a technology or an approach that is actually being used in a company. And there's a difference. You can innovate something. Linux was innovated in the early 1990s. It wasn't really widespread adopted in a widespread sort of way until, my goodness, 2000 or later. In fact, it was only just last year and this year, that Microsoft fully said, hey, we're going to use a lot of open source and Linux. Just an example of how long it takes to actually adopt something. And there's kind of a cycle that goes on where you have something that triggers the interest in innovation. And then you have a peak of inflated expectations. For example, take blockchain. Right now, I think we're kind of at the peak of inflated expectations for blockchain. I'm a big fan of blockchain, but I think there's a lot of, it's going to change the world kind of thing. Then what happens is that it kind of descends down into what they call the trough of disillusionment. Sounds kind of depressing, doesn't it? But strangely, it's when people start, the hipsters anyway, start getting disillusioned about a particular technology, is actually where adoption begins. So I think it's important to talk about the changes in the cloud that I'm going to, as I discuss them, to understand, okay, there are certain innovations, but when will they actually be, used in a company? Well, let's talk about some of the innovations. And before we understand this, I think it's important to understand kind of the 4 pillars of IT that we put together at CompTIA. There's infrastructure. By infrastructure, I'm not just talking about physical devices, but infrastructure as in the networking infrastructure. There's security, or cybersecurity, where applications and data are secured, where data either in storage, at rest, or data in transit is secured. Then also there's data. How can the cloud help with the consolidation and analysis of organizational data? And how is it kept private? A major issue. There's development, the entire software development cycle. How is software made? How is it released to the world? So these 4 pillars basically can kind of capture, help us capture understanding of certain innovations. And they work together in various ways. You have infrastructure and development, where you're matching architecture to development needs. You could say development and security, where you're creating applications directly into security rather than doing it as an add-on like so many times we do. There's many different ways in which all of these areas work. But where does the cloud fit into it? What I've noticed in doing research, or at least in reading the research that our team at CompTIA comes up with, is that there are a lot of newer concepts, from 3D printing, Internet of Things as well on it. It's already adopted in many ways. But biometrics, the changes there, the changes in drones and how they're being used in creative ways in robotics. The cloud fits in because it makes it possible for us to do biometrics, to take advantage of the Internet of Things. It makes it possible for us to do mixed and virtual reality. It is in many ways the underlying technology. So let's take a look at cloud implementations as of 2018. You know, it's taken longer than I think anybody thought for the cloud to actually be adopted. Yes, it was innovated, the word was innovated back in the 1990s, and there have been lots of changes in software as a service and infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. But you know, it has only been in the last few years that the cloud has been fully embraced by companies. There's a research report that we just released here just today, and we're noticing that finally companies are in the 90% of using some form of the cloud. Before, just a few years ago, the acceptance of the cloud was really rather tepid, rather low. Two types of cloud in many ways. There's public and private. Some people will argue, well, if it's private cloud, it really isn't cloud. I believe that there really are public and private clouds. By public, I mean Amazon Web Services. Right now, any of you on this call can go out and open up your own AWS account and get some virtual machines going, and away you go. When it comes to private, you're doing something that is not so much on a tenant basis. You are doing something that is much more closed off. Well, back in the day, remember when there were many infrastructure as a service challengers, and the conversation was always focused on, what is cloud and what isn't cloud, and experimental things. And the skill set was on creating cloud offerings, within tech companies. Banks were staying away from it, governments were staying away from it, et cetera. Well, we're seeing changes. We've seen major changes over. We have mission critical systems worldwide, from governments, even banks have used the clouds. And it's not so much what is the cloud, it's how can I use and implement the cloud. So that means that there has been a change in the industry to where people are saying, look, we need specific skills. Still, cloud expertise is a bit hard to find. And the top 3 cloud challenges that we have found are lack of resources, and by that I mean people. There's plenty of cloud providers, but the people to run it. Security has been a major concern. If not a real concern, it's a real concern. Let's put it this way. There is nothing inherently insecure about the cloud. It's just as secure or not secure as any other implementation. Back in the day, a lot of people used to say, well, Linux is more secure than Windows or whatever. I think the smart folks basically said, well, you can make an insecure or bad implementation of Linux just as easily as you can make a secure one of Windows. My point is that you need people to understand the security implications of using the cloud. Finally, there's not been a lot of strong understanding of how to manage spending on the cloud and where to spend your money. Over the last year or so, I've talked with folks at Microsoft, for example, who said they have seen a lot of delay in implementing cloud-based solutions. I've heard the same thing in talking to my friends at Oracle. They've seen a lot of projects put off because they just didn't have the talented people, both from a developer standpoint, but also from people who just understand networking and understand resources to do the cloud. Another innovation that's been happening here lately is the idea of edge networking. You basically have with edge networking the following concept. I think the cloud, remember, is where you have services and applications and entire infrastructures that are offered from a third party remote to where you are. Well, with edge networking coming in, that's really made it much more possible. Because now with the advent of Internet of Things devices, with the advent of so many cloud services, we're finding it interesting, I'll say, to try to aggregate data. And so what you have, I was talking to a gentleman at Western Digital, and he was basically saying that when it comes to the cloud, you have so many devices these days. It's not just tablets and mobile phones like we talked about 10 years ago or 5 years ago. It's Internet of Things devices, the wearables, the automobiles, and everything. So many of these things create so much content, and we want to manage that content in ways for marketing and for gathering and research, so that we basically need edge networks to act as, how do you want to call it, intermediate collecting devices. And the metaphor that my friend Robin O'Neill came up with is really, it's kind of like the IoT devices are drops of rain. How many drops of rain are there? There's billions or whatever. And as those fall to the ground, what do? Oh, they collect into puddles. They collect into little streams, into larger streams, into rivers, into lakes, into large rivers, and then oceans. So the idea is that with edge networking, one of the major skills that we're going to need is the ability to create and manage a lot of these intermediate devices. And so the cloud is not just something where you're going to go to work for a cloud provider or go to work for an organization that uses the cloud. You are going to be working possibly in a networking environment where you're going to have to understand 5G networking. You're going to have to understand the concept of what software-defined networking is, SDN. Those things are very important. We're also seeing a lot of virtualized network solutions where entire networks are being virtualized. When it comes to security concerns, we're seeing a lot of issues with IoT devices. Now, I realize you're probably thinking, well, wait, I thought this was a cloud webinar. Well, IoT is the cloud. And so with the Internet of Things, security issues have been major issues because a lot of devices were rushed to market. And by devices, I mean probably, I don't know about your Fitbit, but wearable devices, baby monitors, things like that. The Mirai botnet happened last year, the largest denial of service attack ever to be found. And we find it be discovered, and what we found is that it was waged by baby monitors. And these baby monitors and other devices had full stack Linux systems on them, little mini stacks. They didn't need to have that, but they did. And it was on a lot of these devices have firmware that can't be upgraded. There's no password that can be set, so anybody can own them. This is because when it comes to IoT security devices and other things that have been rushed to market lately, when I say lately, the last few years, the software development lifecycle wasn't followed particularly well. Had weak or no authentication, weak encryption. So as you rush things to market, you have security issues. And it created conditions for possible mass attack. And so you can try to do firmware updates, but the main thing is you want to have a secure software development lifecycle. And that's a major skill for IoT and the cloud moving forward. As a developer, you should consider that. If you're looking to get into development, if you can bring those skills to bear, you will find employment. Most cloud models are seeing very healthy adoption. They like it because, when I say they, companies like it because it can cut costs. The cloud solution was simply a better solution. You'll notice the cost is a major issue in that we can do things more efficiently by adopting cloud-based solutions rather than having to bring in all that hardware internally and bring all of that software development expertise internally. We can bring it in as an as-service sort of basis. And it does reduce operational complexity. So these are the major reasons that you can see for simplicity. You can help modernize things, but it's basically not just a cost-cutting thing. It really is where you can use existing personnel in a much more efficient way. So as a potential employee, one of the things you should think about is, do I want to work for a cloud provider and help them create virtualization, help them secure things, help them enable secure storage? Or do I want to work as a worker or a consultant to help a company implement cloud solutions? Those are two rough choices that you have. Here's a list of the typical public and private cloud providers that we put together here at CompTIA. The usual suspects here, from Microsoft, Amazon, Google, HP. I would put Oracle in there under public and also private cloud. Oracle should definitely be in there. But these are some of the players that you ought to be thinking about. When it comes to cloud implementation, we've looked at it, and what we've noticed is one of the reasons why implementation was rather slow is definitely there's a lack of cloud-ready workers, but also there's been a lot of experimentation. And there's also been, we will use the cloud for something that's a little less critical as a service, just that way in case it crashes or fails, I won't lose my job or the company won't lose its ability to work. But what we've noticed is that there's been a pretty rapid movement towards full production once people understand the benefits of the cloud. One of the things we're also seeing is migration. Clearly, obviously, migration from installed traditional services to cloud services, yes. But we're also seeing a lot of migration from public cloud to private cloud. We're also seeing migration from one public cloud provider to the next. Microsoft worked real well, but I like how Oracle does theirs, or how another company does theirs, so I'll move to them. The idea is that you can, as a cloud worker, if you can understand the specific issues having to do with migration, you can find very solid work. If you have the ability to say, okay, you want to move from provider X to provider Y, let's compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges and see if we can do this migration. And to do that sort of thing, the types of skills that you need to know are, first of all, can you read a contract? Do you know what an NDA is even? But going into the contract, what about a service level agreement, an SLA? So notice I have used a couple acronyms here, NDA, SLA. Notice that there's not a technical protocol listed yet. I'm not talking about TCP/IP. I'm not talking about encryption or SSL or whatever. I'm talking about business issues. So one of the first things that you have to understand, not only in terms of migration, but understanding the cloud, is that it's a business decision. And so as a technician, you also need to understand technical implications. So as you do migration from public to private or vice versa, or even from, I've seen implementations from actually the cloud right to the old-fashioned installed in certain cases. You need to be able to understand how all of those things work and the business implications. One of the things that I've researched is about the idea of it as an architect planning a particular network implementation. There are various frameworks that are relevant to the cloud. There's the Zachman framework, the Open Group framework, TOGAF. There's the FEA for federal folks, and the Gartner Enterprise Architecture. The Gartner one tends to be more for the finance side. These tend to be frameworks. There's 4 or 5 frameworks here, 4 of them, that you may want to consider looking into so that you can understand how the cloud is used today in modern networks. These are frameworks that have found good adoption. One thing that happens a lot with the cloud is the accusation of rogue IT, or another term, stealth IT. What is that? Basically, back in the good old days, when the CIO, when she or he ruled all of the roost, any technology implementation had to go through the CIO. If it didn't, it was considered rogue, or it was considered stealth, or it was considered, another term, shadow IT. In other words, unauthorized IT. But with the cloud, it makes it much easier to go out and grab your IT solution, doesn't it? In other words, as a sales force decides, hey, I want to use salesforce.com, or as a marketing individual says, well, there's this really nice cloud service. More and more, we are seeing solutions being made, if not independent of the CIO, certainly those business decisions are being informed by people independent of the CEO. So the VP of sales will say, I want to use this, and the CIO pretty much goes, well, let's take a look at it, and it makes sense to me. So what can happen, though, is that organizations don't have good communication sometimes, and they will, and the salesperson will implement a particular cloud solution that the CIO doesn't know anything about. So communication and cultural understanding of how decisions are made is very important when it comes to implementing the cloud. Otherwise, things can go, quote unquote, sideways on you very quickly because you're now implementing a particular solution that your CIO doesn't know about. And that means you could be engaging in security and privacy issues that could cost the company dearly, both in terms of getting hacked, or if you do business with the European Union, for example, you may fall afoul of GDPR regulations. GDPR is just getting implemented officially. I should say it comes live, what is it, May 21st? Anyway, this month. And the idea is that if you violate any of those types of recommendations, your company could get serious fines. Not just by getting hacked, but because you have you have not met privacy concerns. Again, I realize that at least I live in the United States. I'm here in Seattle, Washington. But if we do business with the European Union countries, you can have a problem. So it's very important from a security, privacy, and cost perspective to not have too many rogue situations going on, not have any. We're seeing a lot of new procedures and changes in existing procedures and adapted management tools because of the cloud. It used to be that you could manage applications because they were on a by-seat basis. And you said, well, here, how many people, how many computers I have, and I need this many licenses, etc. Or I need to manage a particular application, no problem. Well, it's a little different now because the cloud, because the application is now stored in the cloud, or the solution is stored elsewhere. So it has required changes. That's not digital transformation, really. It is if it results in a radical refocusing of the company. If it's a technology-based change, I would say it's not digital transformation in the slightest. If it's something that changes a company's understanding of how to approach the market, or even to change what it markets and sells, then that is digital transformation for sure. The skills that companies have added to the clouds include an understanding of integration. Most companies don't just get rid of their old ways and then adopt the cloud whole hog. What they do is they bridge old applications to cloud applications. So you need specialists, both networking professionals and developers, to understand how to integrate old and new platforms. We're also seeing ways in which people can build what's called private clouds, and that means people who understand their encryption well, and also developers. We're also seeing cloud architect, a departmental liaison. In other words, people who can turn business issues, business concerns, and business talk into technical speak, and vice versa, who can kind of translate. In other words, as we have created a cloud solution, they can go work from department to department and say, here's how you used to do things, here's how it works now, and here's how it's better, and here's how you adjust your work environment, your work practices to the new environment. The cloud architects are people who can take a look at how different systems work together. IDLE, for example, is the beginning of understanding that. Understanding simple object access, SOAP, and REST cloud type and web communications architecture is very important to understand. And then compliance. Compliance having to do with various rules and regulations. And by rules and regulations, I'm talking about HIPAA in the United States. Having to do with healthcare. There's PCI if you're a company that is doing e-commerce. You have to conform to those standards in order to continue using credit cards in your business. There's compliance to, say, privacy regulations, GDPR. Governments have various FIPS compliance issues that they have to work on. So those are the types of skills. Goals for an organization, they want to be more efficient. Who doesn't? But it's the whole idea of saying, using existing employees or as few employees as possible, can we do more? They also want to innovate, and they want to get to the market sooner. They're also maintaining key customer accounts better, because everybody should know anyway in business that it's easier to renew or keep a customer than it is to go out and grab a new one. And of course, the idea of going out and grabbing more segments or getting new customers and deepening your penetration into a particular segment. These are pretty expected, but as a cloud worker in implementing virtualization or what have you, you could say, well, tactically, I don't really care about these types of things. But with the cloud, one of the phenomena that's occurred is that technical workers are often now much closer to understanding the business decisions and why those are. It actually does help you technically. The challenges that people are finding is they're still finding it hard to find people to manage and provision the cloud. In other words, hey, we've done a cloud adoption. We thought we would use this much of a service. Oops, we've just bought way too much and we spent too much money and we're not using it. We're only using 10% of the capacity that we bought. The other issue is very common though. In other words, we thought we would, need to use 100%, but actually we're using 200%. We're using twice as much as what we thought. Also, modifying cloud applications. If you've bridged old systems to new ones, sometimes you have to do a lot of modifications there, and that is time consuming. So these are some of the issues here. But one of the things I found interesting was the number 4, the help desk support issue. They're finding that a lot of help desk workers are not as aware of how the cloud works and how the different types of troubleshooting. And they also are being asked to do a lot more in terms of managing data and information and resetting passwords, etc. And they're finding it to be a challenge. So one of the things that I think is important when it comes to challenges is to understand from an architectural level what are some of the things that you need to know. And so I think there are a lot of individuals that might be good, for example, at the networking side, but don't know much about storage, or they don't know much about how servers operate. And even though workers, the cloud moves a lot of those concerns to another layer, to a software layer, it does not absolve you of your responsibility to understand all of these different elements. In fact, as you move things to the cloud, you're going to find that you can't be as specialized in your knowledge. In other words, hey, I'm a networking person. I don't really care about storage or servers. With the cloud, you got to know it all. Because if you're going to be asked, hey, what kind of provisioning, what kind of services do we need as we create the service level agreement? What kind of capacity do we need for storage and CPU usage, and what about our networking? All of these things are now very related, and so it's important to understand each of those elements. Here are the platforms that tend to be used on a cloud, hosted, and also as a software as a service percentage. Notice email there, pretty much at the top. Business productivity, I'm talking about like Salesforce.com or SoberPop. Obviously, web presence, financial management having to do with basically accounting software. Those round out kind of the top 4. Voice over IP, a lot of systems have gone from installed boxes that are in a particular network, and they've just simply gone out to a cloud provider. So these are the types of, so if you want to do well in the cloud, it's very important for you to understand email, the different types of business productivity suites that are out there, from SAP to those provided by Oracle and PeopleSoft, Oracle, PeopleSoft are one, but also things like Salesforce.com. When it comes to cloud migrations, it's all about long-term planning and project management. And a major skill that has come to fore, top of mind of a lot of workers inside and outside of cloud adoption, is the concept of project management. You can't just, used to be, okay, we're going to implement something over the next 6 months and away we go. When it comes to cloud migrations, you're talking about 18 months. You're talking about working on how many hours it takes to implement. So you have to start dividing and conquering these activities. And that means project management. As I mentioned before, there's architectural planning, where you have to start thinking about basically the roles, the types of processing, and also the communications in place, kind of 3 layers. So as you're building new structure and processes and you change the operations, you basically have to determine how to create better services, and is the cloud going to do that or not. So the technical skills that are really interesting lately to companies when it comes to the cloud, I've listed them here in this very busy little slide. Privacy is very important. understanding of data sensitivity, labeling it, handling it. More and more, either through regulations or through just general interest from the public, companies have to be very careful about how they are retaining and how they are using data. Are they keeping it private? Back in the good old days when a company got hacked, it was, okay, credit cards were revealed, go get a new credit card, and you'll pretty much be okay. Nowadays, people are very interested in how their information is being used to generate wealth for a company. And that is going to become more and more important for any company that uses the cloud. Networking and cloud skills include the understanding of migration, understanding network architecture, 5G, edge networking. Also how to go about and creating virtualization. If you're going to go work for a cloud provider, you're going to be working on systems that can spin up 200-300 virtual machines. How do you make sure that all of those work right? From a web development, or I shouldn't say web, excuse me, but from an app to a web development perspective, languages such as Python have really risen up in terms of importance. Java remains an important one. Ruby, there's the .NET, C# approach as well. Make sure you know your JavaScript, and make sure you know your shell scripting, etc. From a IT service management perspective, from a help desk, tech support perspective, think of it this way: the endpoint has changed. Used to be there were all these applications installed on the device. More and more, a lot of those applications are installed in the cloud. I'm not saying it's all one or the other, but the endpoint has morphed and has changed. You're going to now support cloud services. So as you work on particular applications, that application may be stored in the cloud or locally. So you have some enhanced troubleshooting skills that you want to bring in. So as things have morphed at CompTIA, we've been interested in finding ways to educate people and do the same thing here at New Horizons. And we find it's all about pathways. This picture here is something I took again in Scotland. It's called the Quiring. It's a really cool place to go hiking, trust me. I think upskilling the workforce involves an educational path. It requires hands-on training and practical assessment and lifelong learning. And what you see here is basically a picture of this thing called the Quiring, this really cool hike, those stones there. And if you look at that topographical map below, where it says the prison, the table, and all that, that's the same place. It's just in map form. What I find at CompTIA, it's very important to have a mapping of the types of skills that you need to get. And so what we've done is we've created infrastructure and cybersecurity pathways. We've created ways for you to get those cloud types of skills. A+ is for endpoints. You could say it's for help desk, but it's really many ways for endpoints. It's for understanding that part of the cloud. Networking actually allows you to understanding, Network Plus allows you to understand how data works in transit and how those endpoints, as much as they morph, connect to each other. Security Plus and of course Cloud Plus allows you to understand how data stays private and how you can support all of the different forms of virtualized services. So Cloud Plus, for example, does a very good job of teaching people how they can plan services and how they can go and provision services and also do things such as migrations. We find that the demand for the skill set for the services found within Cloud Plus are very high. We're talking to a senior director for service and delivery at the University of Notre Dame. And the quote is basically this: we need people who can take the building blocks, such as virtual servers, and from the cloud and put them all together. You need to put together the storage and the server and the networking and the domain name services, the DNS information, to create the proper service. So one of the things that's really important to understand when it comes to understanding the cloud is it's not just, oh, well, that'll get taken care of by the cloud. No, now it makes you responsible for even more elements. If you want to put it in geek terms, there's this thing called the OSI-RM, 7-layer model. Layer 1 is physical stuff like electronics and wires. Layer 7 is, in a sense, basically basically how something gets represented onto your screen like that you're looking at today. Layer 3 is the networking. Used to be that you could just say, well, I'm layer 3 guy, or I'm the application guy for layer 7, or I'm the layer 1 person. With the cloud, you're all the layers. You have to understand how each of them works together. Now, this concludes the formal presentation part of the webinar, but I'm happy to take any sorts of questions or clarify anything that I might have said that I might have gone over too quickly or not said quite right. So Kelly, are there any types of questions that folks have for me today about innovations in the cloud?
Yeah, let's give people a chance. Go ahead. If you guys have any questions, feel free to type those in now. Also, just want to remind you all that this session was being recorded, so I will send you all a link to view the session recording at your convenience. And I also want to remind you that we are promoting our Cloud and Virtualization Month here at New Horizons. So there are free webinars and white papers available to you all month long. In my email to everyone later today, I will include a link to download those white papers and view past webinar sessions that you may have missed, or register for any upcoming sessions as well. And James, it looks like we don't have any questions, so I think we can go ahead and wrap up today's webinar. Thank you so much for presenting on behalf of New Horizons and CompTIA.
Thanks so much, Kelly. We just released some new research just today, and what I'll do is I'll send you a link to that, and you can send it off to the people who've attended. And if they have any questions, they can feel free to contact me at my email there. You can follow me on Twitter, or you can take a look at any of the articles that I've written. So I want to thank you, Kelly, and thank you, New Horizons, and all of you for joining in.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, James. And thanks again, everyone. You may now log off. Have a great day.
Take care. Bye-bye.